a few more people have filtered in, so we're going to get going here. I want to go ahead and introduce ourselves, and really excited for this morning. Thanks for taking the time out of your day. This is leading through crisis, critical thinking and decision making. This is going to be led by Strata's Manager of Leadership Services, which is Wes Martin. I'm Jeremiah Shaw. I'm the Executive Vice President here at Strata Leadership. I'm going to be your host today, answering any questions in the chat box, engaging you there. Really excited to get going in that, and I'll walk you through that in a second. If you aren't familiar with Strata Leadership, we are a leadership development firm. We're hosted out of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. We're proud of that, but we serve clients all over the nation. We specialize in executive coaching, training, and leadership development programs like Institute for Emerging Leaders, Senior Leadership Academy. We also provide resources just like this in times like this for people like you. So really appreciate you joining us. Our heart for today is that you get to push pause in this crazy moment in our world, that this webinar will leave you with some hope, that it will be rejuvenating, and hopefully push back that survival mode that you've been living in, and help push you into a little bit of creative thinking for you as you lead your team. So I'm gonna introduce Wes Martin here in just a second. If you haven't met Wes, he is a phenomenal person. I get to work with Wes on a daily basis here at Strata. And like I said, he is our Manager of Leadership Services, which means he gets to oversee all of our trainers and coaches. He develops them. He identifies talent out there, brings them in, trains them, and then supports our clients via our coaches and trainers. So Wes holds a master's degree from Colorado State University in industrial and organizational psychology. And I would say just getting to know Wes over the past few years, Wes is one of the most insightful people I know. And I think that translates into leadership in this way. Wes is an expert at giving insights based on not just historical figures, but current day figures from a psychological perspective and discipline. So he's going to walk us through some great content today based on those insights. I'm really excited for you to get to know my friend Wes. We're going to give you our contact information here on this slide momentarily. Let me transition that. Wes, if you want to move to the next slide, that'd be great. There we go. Feel free to contact us if you have questions from this webinar. We're going to be doing this again next week. We were overwhelmed with the response of participants and signups. So we decided to go ahead and we will be doing this again, and we'll provide you with that link if you feel like this was beneficial and you want to maybe have your team sign up. So a little bit of housekeeping before we jump in. If you are not on mute, I think everybody's on mute, so thank you for that. Go ahead and push mute. I imagine most of us are at home and there are kids and probably dogs in the background. I know Wes and myself are working from home as well through this crisis, and there's a lot of pros and a lot of cons there. So please mute yourself. Also, I'm going to be jumping into the chat box with you all here in a moment. Wes is going, as Wes teaches this, feel free to jump in that chat box. If you haven't used Zoom before, at the very bottom of your screen, it says chat. Click on that. It'll open the chat box. And then there's a blue tab, and you can filter through if you want to chat with everybody or if you just want to chat with me. I'm going to be taking some questions, and at the end, we'll have a Q&A time. If you don't feel comfortable asking that question publicly, if you send it to me, I'll make sure and keep that anonymous, and we can address those at the end of this. So here in a moment, we're going to jump into that chat room. So go ahead and open that up for me. And if you'd share your name, where are you coming from? I know we have some people from out of state this morning. And then what organization are you with? Who are you representing? This isn't just for us. This is for everybody else on the screen. I hope that this is a moment for you to build your network and build your community. If you see somebody on here that you feel like might be a beneficial relationship, I encourage you to privately message them, get their contact information, and stay in contact. So what I love about my job is I get to be the middleman in between a lot of our clients sometimes, and that is really fulfilling for me because I get to connect people to people and help you find the resources you need And a lot of times those resources are relationships. All right, the second thing, again, so we walked through the chat box, engage in the network. The second question we have is, what do you hope to learn today? And then there is also a poll we're going to pass out during this, and we will address that poll at the end. Again, we like to engage our audience. We love to learn more about you and learn more about each other. So we'll show you these results at the end of the webinar. Also, if you stick around to the end of the webinar, we have an incredible crisis model that we've developed that we will send out to you and make sure you get that free gift. So Wes, we're going to get started here as I pull this up. I would love to see, again, if you missed that question number 2, just what are you hoping to learn today? I know for me, I'm hoping to find just a pause today and meet some new people, and also hear how I might speak to my team through this crisis. So looking forward to that. Any other thoughts on the chat before we get going? All right. Oh, there's one right there. Some new insights on how to lead myself better and how to help leaders more effectively in this time. Somebody else said best practices for managing through this crisis and validation that I am doing okay. That's actually a really good one. I think as a leader, we're definitely looking for validation. A lot of times we don't get that, obviously, from the people that we're leading, and especially depending on our community, we may not get that feedback. So, all right, well, we're going to jump in here. I'll be in the chat box. Remember, if you have private questions, click on my name on the blue box in the chat box, send those to me, and I will hold those for later. We're going to get going. Wes, I'm going to pass this off to you. You heard from some of the attendees today on what they're expecting from us, so hopefully we deliver.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love hearing those, what you're looking forward to today. And really, we're going to cover a lot of content today, but today is about more than the content. It's about creating a space, creating margin for you to be able to step back as a leader and for us to be able to serve you. At Strata Leadership, we are passionate about serving leaders. We find that often leaders don't know what they're doing well, and they do need that validation, and they do need somebody who's in their corner, who's an ally, who's championing them in their leadership efforts. So that's absolutely what we hope to accomplish today. And if at the end of this, my sincere hope, my number one goal in putting together this webinar today is just that you be feeling refreshed, rejuvenated, confident, and hopeful, because leadership is needed during this time. One of the reasons we wanted to offer this free training is because crisis leadership is an important thing. And as leaders, in a way, we're always managing crisis. And so there's not a whole lot that's new about entering into a new crisis. That's part of our job, is putting out fires and casting a vision for the future. And we're going to cover all of that today. But in a lot of other ways, this does feel new, and it's overwhelming and it's stressful. And we're hearing from leaders that you're feeling anxious. You're not knowing what to do. You're wrestling with your own pain, your own suffering, whatever you're going through personally. And then you're also having to be present for your team. And so we hope that this will be a time where you can feel served and just sit back and relax and receive and be refreshed. So Jeremiah introduced me a little bit, but my name is Wes Martin, and I'm the Manager of Leadership Development Services at Strata Leadership. And a couple other things you need to know about me. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I have a daughter who's 14 months old, and I'm working from home just like the rest of you. So I'm stationed right now in my dining room, and my wife is a nurse. So she works 2 days a week, and really thankful for her and all of the nurses and doctors that are on the front lines, and everyone else, the grocery workers, everyone who's putting themselves out at risk to take care of the rest of us. Really thankful for that. And I want you guys to know this is hitting me at home too, with my wife being a nurse, and they're out playing in the backyard so we can leave this webinar undistracted. But this is our new reality, and it's fun, and there's a lot of good things about it, and we're going to get to that. But that's a little bit about myself. As we're putting together this idea of how do you lead through crisis, it seems appropriate to start with a historical example that literally has crisis in the title. So some of you in here today, you may have been alive during this time, or maybe your parents, certainly your parents or your grandparents were alive and you've heard stories about this. But the Cuban Missile Crisis was this extreme tension that existed between the United States, and then on the other side was Cuba and the Soviet Union. And it lasted 13 days. And very similar to the situation that we're in right now, there was fear and anxiety of the unknown and what's going to come to us. And so for the United States, the threat was 70 million lives. There was a very real threat that we were on the brink of nuclear warfare. So on October 14th, the U-2 spy plane, which is a US spy plane, was flying over the coast of Cuba and noticed some irregularities in the landscape. And upon further analysis, revealed that there were missile sites, nuclear missiles scattered throughout the country that were identified as belonging to the Soviet Union. And at this time, we were at the height of the Civil War, and the Soviet Union and the US had tensions, and we didn't really know at the brink or the threat of nuclear warfare was always present. So the threat wasn't new, but the immediacy of seeing it that close to Cuba, that was new. And that was something that was really, really scary, because those missiles, it was determined, would wipe out the majority of the United States in the first attack, stretching almost all the way over to California. And the conservative estimates were that between 70 million to 100 million lives would be lost if we were to go into nuclear warfare just in that first round of attacks. And so the entire country stood on the brink of destruction, and people didn't know, is this going to be my last day? And we have journals and historical records from that time of people genuinely writing down, I don't know if there's going to be a tomorrow. I don't know if my city is going to survive this. And the threat was incredibly real, and the crisis was very intense. And at this time, John F. Kennedy had been the president for 2 years. And so as the commander in chief, he's responsible for how does the US respond to this threat of nuclear warfare. And on October 22nd, he delivered a speech to the nation. And prior to this speech, he had put together a task force known as XCOM. And XCOM was a group of military leaders and those in JFK's cabinet, his close trusted political advisors. And they had determined that there were essentially 6 options, ranging all the way from do nothing to let's go invade and let's go to war with Cuba right this second and start this. You know, the idea was that the military perspective was the threat had been brought to us. And so the only appropriate response was to respond with the full military force and launch into war immediately and invade Cuba and destroy these missile sites. And that was the popular opinion at the time. The XCOM task force, that was the overwhelming sentiment amongst that group of people, as well as the Congress leaders. They thought the appropriate response was to respond with the full force of our military and all of the gunpowder and ammunition that we could bring there, or other measures like just doing an airstrike. And JFK, he didn't want to do that. He was in the minority of, he didn't feel like war should be our first option. He wanted first to seek diplomacy. And so on October 22nd, he delivered the nation and caught everybody up to what had been going on over those 8 days, those 8 tense days of decision and conversations in the White House, and decided that we were going to engage in a blockade. And so that was kind of somewhere in the middle between doing nothing and going to war. So we set up a blockade around Cuba, preventing any new missiles from coming in, and began diplomatic resolutions, those talks to seek resolution with the Soviet Union Premier Khrushchev. And JFK and Khrushchev were going back and forth. And on October 22nd, the same day that JFK delivered this speech, he wrote a letter to Khrushchev. And it's really clear, you can see in that letter why JFK wanted to avoid warfare. He said, in nuclear war, there are no winners. Everyone loses. And so JFK had resolved at that moment that he was not going to want to go to war. He was going to avoid it at all costs necessary. And it wasn't that it wasn't an option for him. It was a very real option for him, but it was that he determined he wanted to seek diplomacy first. Tensions were escalating. The diplomatic conversations were really not going anywhere, with neither side being willing to give up too much. And then on October 22nd, tensions escalated to an all-time high. Major Rudolph Anderson, who was another U-2 spy plane pilot, was flying over Cuba and was shot down and killed. And at this point, okay, a shot's been fired. We've got to go to war. Right now, let's rush into war. And JFK analyzed the situation. And what history now tells us is that he rightly analyzed that this was an isolated incident. This was not directed by Cuban leadership or Soviet Union leadership, but still the tensions rose. And it really rose to an emotional level for JFK when he realized that Rudolph Anderson had a 4-year-old son. And JFK at the time had his own 4-year-old son, John Jr. And so you can imagine the emotional connection of a father and a commander-in-chief, the leader of a nation who's just lost one of his military service men, and the real threat of going to war and the emotional response. But JFK created the distance, continued to seek diplomacy, decided that this was an isolated event, which it was. It was a Soviet commander acting completely out of line and shooting it down when he was not given instructions to do so. And on October 28th, just a day after, a treaty was reached, and the treaty involved the Soviet Union agreeing to dismantle and remove all of the missile sites from Cuba. And so you can feel over these 14 days of tension while the US is on the brink of nuclear destruction and JFK holds the decision in his hand, and the tension he must have felt as a leader under crisis in this situation, and the pressure to go against the grain when everyone was telling him to do one thing and he wanted to do another thing, and the resolve and the commitment that that would have taken for JFK. And it's a great example of leadership. As a result of this crisis, one life was lost and not 70 million. And in a lot of ways, we have JFK to thank for that, his resolve to avoid the crisis and to determine that he could mitigate the threat through diplomatic resolution, which he did. So there's a few leadership lessons we can pull from this example, and let's just walk through them really quick. During this time, during the 13 days, we have records of JFK and those around him saying that he spent an extraordinary amount of time under crisis with his nation on the brink of nuclear destruction, doing things like swimming, sitting in the Rose Garden, and sketching. And I believe Jeremiah even has a link that he can share with you from the Library of Congress on some of the doodles that JFK was doing in those XCOM meetings. And it's amazing just to see in there and to see the perspective of those around him during this time, that JFK was cultivating space for himself. So it may seem silly to you that he was going on swims in the White House pool when his country is potentially about to go to war or be destroyed. It can seem trivial, but he wasn't doing that accidentally. He was doing that intentionally. He wanted to cultivate the space, slow his system down, and make the best decision he could, separating his decision-making from his emotional response. And there's even in Ryan Holiday's book, Stillness is the Key, he talks about there's a letter that JFK wrote to the gardener of the Rose Garden during that time, thanking her for her contributions to keeping us out of war and keeping our country from being destroyed. So you can see JFK wasn't going to sit in the Rose Garden accidentally. This was a very deliberate leadership decision he was making. Another thing that JFK did is he sought consultation from the former president, Dwight Eisenhower. And JFK had a tremendous amount of respect for Eisenhower, but Eisenhower, coming from a military background, he was with the rest of the XCOM team in Congress in the sense that he thought that JFK should make the decision to invade and go to war. And those transcripts of the conversations, the private conversations between JFK and former President Eisenhower are available online. And it's really interesting to read those. You have a mentor, an older man who's been there before, advising JFK, and then you have the protege, the successor to the position of presidency, not agreeing, but at the same time there was so much respect between there, and having somebody to talk to as you're going through crisis, a mentor or a coach. Which at Strata Leadership we provide executive coaching, and we're really passionate about it, and we go to great lengths to do it well, to make sure you have a confidential person that you can speak to in a confidential and safe environment, and they're going to be a champion for you, and they're also going to be the boldest person in the room. So they're going to tell you the things that you need to hear that other people may not be able to tell you or may not be willing to tell you. And so having a coach or a mentor or a friend, an ally to speak to when you're going through a crisis leadership situation is crucial. And then lastly, another thing is just looking back to the past helps us look to the future. So JFK, ironically, when he came into office in 1960, he inherited this covert reconnaissance operation from former President Eisenhower at the time, now known as the Bay of Pigs invasion. And the Bay of Pigs invasion was a secret operation through the CIA where 1,400 Cuban exiles who had been thrown out by the communist government were recruited by CIA agents and trained to go on a reconnaissance mission into Cuba to attempt to overthrow the communist regime and Fidel Castro. And it was a colossal failure, maybe one of the most embarrassing marks in US history. The exiles were captured almost immediately. And JFK, early in his presidency, even though he had inherited this operation from President Eisenhower, he was ridiculed for it. In the first 6 months of his leadership, he led this failed Bay of Pigs invasion that would be connected to his presidency for the rest of his life. And so looking back on that, JFK had actually formed a task force to see what went wrong. And one of the chief findings of that task force was that there was this arrogance of invincibility that caused the leadership to ignore the warning signs that this was a bad idea and press on anyways, believing we're going to make it work through grit and determination. And it was determined that that level of arrogance and that haughtiness to act first and then think later was a really bad decision strategically. And it cost a lot of embarrassment and rising tensions between obviously the Cuban government and the United States government. In addition, JFK had been a World War II veteran, so he had seen firsthand the perils and the horrors and the tragedies of war, and it wasn't something that he wanted to rush into quickly. And so looking back to our past and learning from that can give us the wisdom to be able to make wise leadership decisions in this moment. So we're going to talk through 3 leadership principles of leading through crisis. What's required of a leader as you lead through crisis? The first one is going to be preparation. So piggybacking off of what we just said about the Bay of Pigs invasion and how JFK was able to learn from his past, look at this quote from John F. Kennedy delivering a speech at Yale, his commencement speech in June of 1962. So this was 4 months before the Cuban Missile Crisis and nearly 2 years after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. See where his mind was as a leader in critical thinking and decision making. He said, "The great enemy of truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. Too often we hold fast to the cliches of our forebears. We subject all facts to a prefabricated set of interpretations. We enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought." So you can see in here in this speech that nearly 2 years after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, JFK had learned a crucial lesson. And because he had had the failures in the past and because he had had successes in the past, he was prepared when the Cuban Missile Crisis came to him. And for some of you, this is the most important thing that you need to hear today. You're leading through a crisis right now, and it's intimidating and it's scary and it's uncomfortable. And what I want to tell you is, you know how to do this. You've been preparing for this. You're not in a leadership position by accident. You're in a leadership position because you've done the things necessary to prepare yourself as a leader, to know how to care for your people, lead with vision, lead with conviction, make decisive decisions. Does that mean you're not going to make mistakes? No, you probably are going to make mistakes. But the beauty there is, as a leader, you can apologize and you can pivot at any time. You don't have to get stuck with your mistakes. You can make wiser decisions and move forward. And so I just want to tell you, you've been preparing for this, whether you know it or not, and you know how to deal with this. Preparation, we would say, involves 3 things. The first would be identity. So who you are determines what you do. In other words, your being precedes your doing. And your action is going to come out of a sense of who you are. So getting really clear about who you are, what type of leader you want to be, what kind of legacy you want to leave. How do you want the people on the other end of your leadership to experience you as a leader? Determining that first will set you up to make wise decisions in the future, because your identity determines how you act on the backside. Last August, in August of 2019, it was a Monday morning, and I was sitting at my desk, getting a PowerPoint ready for one of our speakers who would be delivering a keynote on Wednesday. And I got a call from my wife, and it was not a call that I was prepared for. And the call was that her dad, who lives about 3.5 hours away from us, had been diagnosed with a rare form of brain cancer. And at that moment, my whole world stopped spinning. Everything in my life comes right here in this moment. And whenever that happens, whenever a crisis comes to your front door, your brain goes into survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, you're not able to think creatively. Your whole world comes up to your face and you have blinders on and you can't see. And I in that moment, I was wrestling with, how do I respond to this? I've never been in a situation like this before. But I had determined a long time ago that my wife was going to be the first priority in my life. And so in that moment, my identity, who I saw myself as, husband first, everything else later, kicked into gear, and it led me to act decisively. I went into our CEO, Dr. Nathan Meller's office, and at the time he was meeting with Jeremiah, who's my boss, who you met previously. And I interrupted their meeting, and I came in with tears, and I could barely get the words out, but apparently they understood. And Nathan said, "Go be with your wife." And this is what he said. He said, "This is why you work at a place with people who care about you." And Nathan was not thinking about me as an employee at that moment. He was thinking about me as a human being, as a husband, and how does he as a leader support his employee who's going through crisis in that moment. And what you saw in that transaction was a man who had determined that his wife was going to be first and foremost, and an employer who determined that the well-being and his employees as people would be his first priority. When he started Strata Leadership in 2019, he determined that it would be a place of compassion and humanity and empathy. And so what you saw in that transaction play out was two people who had predetermined their identity. And so in a moment of crisis, neither of them were expecting. They knew exactly what to do. And I want to tell you, you've been preparing for this. You have the identity. Lean on who you are, and who you are will determine what you will do. The second thing is trust. So again, going back to that idea of what got you here will get you through, knowing that you've been preparing for this moment and trusting yourself to make good decisions, not second guessing every little decision or every little over-analyzing every little thing, but acting decisively and trusting that what got you to this point will also carry you through. This as are any crisis situations, is temporary, and you will get through this. And so trusting that. And then the last thing is just intent. So deciding who you're going to be. And I don't want preparation to be scary as if, Wes, I haven't been preparing for this moment. How can you tell me I've been preparing for this moment? Preparation doesn't have to be months in advance. Preparation can be deciding when you wake up, what type of leader am I going to be today? Am I going to be the one that leads with conviction, that puts my people first, that loves my employees well? And love is a word that we use often at Strata and not lightly. Am I going to be the type of leader that loves my employees well and cares for them and seeks their well-being, seeks the well-being of the organization and my team? So deciding when you wake up or before a meeting, creating that space for yourself of what type of leader am I going to be in this meeting, and then doing the things necessary to take care of yourself so that you can get into that mindset and that framework and be the type of leader that you want to be. James Clear, in his book Atomic Habits, says this. He says, "Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. No single instance will transform your beliefs, but as the votes build up, so does the evidence of your new identity." So I just want to encourage you with that every action that you take, every behavior you engage in, you're casting a vote for the type of person you want to become in the future. So decide, what type of leader do I want to be in the future? And what can I do today, even in the midst of a crisis, to set myself up to be that type of leader in the future? Casting a vote for who you want to become. So preparation is the first thing required of a leader through crisis. The second thing is leading through crisis requires vision. The vision is a core tenet of leadership at all times, but in crisis it's even more important. As I mentioned earlier, whenever a crisis comes to you and the uncertainty and anxiety and overwhelm, you go into survival mode and your world comes right here and you have blinders on and you can't see the world around you. And so as a leader, doing the things necessary to step back, to cultivate the space, to say, we're going to get through this, and how I act today is going to have an influence on my business in 6 months, in 12 months. That, you know, the things that we're doing today matter, and having a vision for the future of what can I do today to get where I want to go tomorrow. And vision, again, requires three things. First is awareness. So you have to identify and name the issue. It's generally understood, I think, whenever we talk about uncertainty and crisis, that ourselves and everyone we're talking with and our team are understanding and sharing the same definition of what crisis are we talking about. But the reality is, within crisis, there are a lot of micro crises. There are crises that are specific to your organization, your team, yourself as a person, your home life, that I couldn't even begin to understand, and vice versa. And so being clear, having that communication with your team, and then also with yourself of identifying and naming the issue. You can't tackle the issue. You can't take on you can't cast a vision for the future until you first define what is the threat that I'm experiencing today and how can I neutralize or mitigate that. Or maybe in awareness, you're writing down a list of this is everything that I'm feeling. And through that, you're able to see, okay, I've manufactured a lot of crises in my mind, that aren't actually real. And so separating what's real from what's false, or what needs to be dealt with today versus what needs to be dealt with tomorrow, or maybe not at all. The second part of vision is reframing. So see the problem. Within every problem, there's an opportunity. So what is the opportunity for you today? And I'm going to get really personal here, but maybe the opportunity for you as a leader is you're working from home and you're realizing my work-life balance is way out of whack. I don't know my kids as well as I thought I did. I haven't been cultivating the type of life, the type of home life that I want. And now that you're forced and confined to working from home, you're seeing really clearly that there's a disconnect here. There's a dissonance between the type of person, the type of parent, the type of spouse, and just the type of human being that I want to be, and how my work has overtaken that. And so as the work life lines are blurred now more than ever, there's an opportunity within that to get to decide, who am I going to be forward coming out of this crisis? Or maybe the opportunity is for your business. Maybe there's things you've been holding on to for a long time, products and services that you know haven't made sense. And because of the constraints of this crisis, the limited cash flow and the limited resources, you're seeing really clearly, I need to let those things go and focus, as Jim Collins would say in his book, Good to Great, focus on the one or two things that I can be the best in the world at. And so what is the opportunity? Seeing the crisis as an invitation. What's the invitation that I get to step into today, instead of just seeing it as, this is all awful, everything's falling apart. I promise if you look for it, you'll see an opportunity and you'll experience moments of gratitude, as wild and unconventional as that may seem. And then the third thing is dreams. So you may be familiar with the old adage, don't see the forest, or see the forest for the trees. And the idea of being able to zoom out and being able to look and see everything that's going on around you, instead of being so concerned and hyper-focused with the tree in front of you. But as a leader, I would say, not only do you need to see the forest, the bigger picture of what's happening now, you need to be able to see beyond the forest. So at Strata, we've been talking a lot about our sales cycle, to be completely transparent with you, is slowed right now. And we're being sensitive to the fact that people don't have money and there's uncertainty. And we're not asking for sales. We're just here to serve you. We're doing this webinar for free and doing resources of how can we pour into the community. But part of that is being able to build the ramp for tomorrow. So coming out of this crisis, how are the things that we do today creating the vision, creating the future that we want to do tomorrow? And as a leader, this is crucial that you communicate this to your team, that you tell the team, we're going somewhere in 6 months, in 12 months, all of our options, all of our goals that were happening before this, all the good things, all the momentum that we had gained, we're going to come out on the other side of this, and we're going to pick up where we left off. And what can we do today? What are the decisions that we're making? What are the projects that we're prioritizing that get us to the vision of the future tomorrow, being able to dream, to see a reality beyond what's here today. I don't think we can talk about dream without talking about Dr. Martin Luther King. So Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led obviously through a crisis, and I don't need to explain that to any of you. But what's remarkable about Dr. King's leadership through the crisis is he was constantly casting a vision for, I know this is what you see today, but don't lose hope, because there is a tomorrow. There is a way through this, and there's a way for us to create a different reality, a reality that we all want more. And so we have a clip, it's about 1 minute and 45 seconds of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. And I hope it just encourages you and edifies you as you attempt to be the type of leader that dreams big dreams and helps your team to dream big dreams.
So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today
Wow. So I feel like we have to take a moment of silence now after that, right? Just the impact of Dr. King's words. But what you can see in there, and what I want you to pull out from this example, is the idea of Dr. King is not speaking about how things are today. He's speaking about how things can be tomorrow. And as a leader, that's your job, is to cast a vision, to dream big dreams, to not get so tied up in what are the constraints and what are the issues and the problems today, but to instill hope in your team, to push them forward, to give a unifying sense of purpose so that everyone knows where we're going and that they have a leader that believes that they're going to get there. And oftentimes, for people to get where they want to go, they just need somebody who believes in them and somebody who casts a vision and paints a picture of a reality that they would want, but that's not available to them in this moment. And so leading through crisis requires vision. The third thing is, and maybe the most important throughout all of this, is that leading through crisis requires community. And that's part of what we're hoping to create with this webinar today, is just this sense of community, the sense of I'm not alone. I'm not going through this by myself. There are people around me who have my back, who support me. And as a leader, at all times, in good times and in bad, you get to be that person for your team. You get to be the person that shows up and is visible and gets to say, I'm here for you. And so that requires availability. So as a leader in times of crisis, I know we're all wrestling with our own things, our doubts, our insecurities, our struggles, this sense of overwhelm, this desire to be validated. And all of those things are good and natural and healthy, and they need to be embraced as a leader. But at the same time, as a leader, we have a responsibility to our team that we show up for them, that we're there, that we're a source of positivity, that we're present. And, you know, I found as a husband, just bringing it back home, in the 7 years that I've been married to my wife, the number one lesson that I've had to learn over and over is when my wife is going through a crisis, whether I understand it or not, she's going through a real crisis, and what she needs from me in that moment is to be there. She doesn't need me to fix it. And I think that's why, as leaders, when crisis situations or situations of uncertainty come into our backyards, why we withdraw from our teams, is because we feel like I'm the leader, I should have it all together, I should have this all figured out. And the reality is you don't, and nobody's expecting you to. Your team just wants you to show up. They want you to be visible. They want you to be present, because that communicates to them that there's somebody watching out for them, somebody that's got their back. You serve, whether you would like to or not, as a leader. You serve as a source and an anchor of hope in times of trouble and chaos for those that follow you. And so I hope that that's a blessing to you. I hope that that's a role. I would imagine if you're in a leadership position, you probably got there because somebody already saw this inside of you, that you can be an anchor and a rock and a source of stability for people whenever things seem chaotic. The second part about community is courage. So as a leader, where do you need to lean into the tension? You know the things that are going on in your team. You need to be communicating with your team members, calling them up during this time of remote working and saying, what do you need from me? Where are you feeling the tension? What are you struggling with? And Jeremiah does an incredible job of this as my leader. He'll call me and he'll just say, hey, how's it going? And he genuinely wants to know. And he's created that psychologically safe environment for he and I to be able to have that conversation. And what's happening in that moment is when crisis comes to us, our amygdala, which is the emotion controlling center of our brain, goes into overdrive. And when our emotions go into overdrive, you cannot think logically. You literally, your brain will not allow you to go to that place. And so as a leader, having the courage to lean into tension and to pull people out of the chaos for a moment and ask them, what's going on? And then whenever there's tension that needs resolution, having the courage to step in and be the one to address it. So as a leader, during times of crisis, you have to lead with courage. And this courage will create a sense of community as you lean into the tension, that your people see that you're here for them and you're not going to back down and you're not going to shy away from the hard things. In fact, you want to know the hard things so you can help them and be the type of leader that they need. And then the third thing is humanity. So stepping back, having grace for yourself. Crisis has the power to unite and connect. And what you'll see and what you may be seeing during this time is, in this moment of crisis, crisis flattens hierarchy. No longer is there CEO, executive vice president, mid-level manager, individual contributor. In that moment, in those settings, we're all just humans. We're all human beings. We're all struggling with this. Nobody is exempt in times of crisis. Everyone struggles. Everyone suffers. And giving yourself permission and grace as a leader to say, this is hard. And leaning into that with your team. As a leader, I know there's this idea that leadership is lonely, and I don't want to discredit that. Leadership can be lonely. That's one of the reasons why we offer executive coaching services, is because with a coach, you don't have to be lonely. But with your team, there are moments where you have to practice discretion and discipline. You can't share with them all of the reasons for the decision, because your loyalty first and foremost is to the organization, then to the team, then to the individual. And so as a leader, you're often not able to share the things that you would like to share, the rationale for decisions, and this can lead you to draw back from community. But what I want to tell you is, don't allow this idea that leadership is lonely to make you think that leadership always has to be lonely. Leadership can be lonely. It does not have to be lonely. Where you can be vulnerable with your team, be vulnerable. Where you can be authentic with your team, be authentic. Where you can be human with your team, be human. And what you'll find in times of crisis is, if you've got a team, not only do they know that you have their back, but then you get to receive that on the other end as the leader, and know that your team has your back as well. And so don't walk through this alone. Don't go through this as the hero saying, I'm just going to charge through. I'm just going to push through. You're a human. You're suffering. To an extent, you may be suffering more than the people on your team. You're having to deal with all these ideas and all these thoughts and all these stresses and pressures that other people don't have to carry. Leadership is a burden. Leadership is not something to be taken lightly. But where you can, sharing that burden with others, whether it's through a coach, whether it's through a counselor, whether it's a mentor, or the things that you can share with your team, having the courage and the humanity to lead into community in that moment and unite and connect. I know our team has been doing 4 o'clock Zoom meetings every day. And I'm not joking. I'm not an incredibly social person. This quarantine thing, I'm extremely introverted, has probably been easier on me than it has been on the majority of you. But those 4 o'clock meetings at the end of the day have come to be something that I look forward to, and I wouldn't miss them, because our team has united as we've had our kids on the screen and our dogs. We've been able to share in this humanity. And because of that, we're going to be so much stronger coming out of this. We've had such a sense of unity in times of crisis, and how we've been able to deal with this and leaning into community. A great example of community, ironically, General Eisenhower. General Eisenhower, this picture right here, and if you want to guess in the chat box, what do you think General Eisenhower's doing here? So he's got his fist like this, he's got soldiers around him, and some of you may know the answer to this question, but this is an incredible, this picture is historic, and most people don't realize what General Eisenhower is actually doing in here. So you may recognize the date on the screen. This is one day before D-Day, one day before the United States joined World War II. And General Eisenhower, one of the highest ranking generals at the time, did not need to be on the front lines with troops at this time. He could have been back home in the safety of his office doing military strategy and communications. But General Eisenhower is the type of leader that said, when my team is going through a moment of crisis, I'm going to be there for them. I'm going to have the courage to show up, to be visible, to be present. And what General Eisenhower is doing in this picture, our CEO and president, Dr. Nathan Miller, he has the opportunity to serve as part of the Presidential Leadership Institute at York College every summer in collaboration with the Eisenhower family. And he knows Mary Eisenhower, General Eisenhower's granddaughter, really well. And he asked her one time, he said, "What's your grandfather doing in this picture?" And she said, "He's talking to his men about fly fishing." So on the on the brink of the United States entering World War II, General Eisenhower is boots on the ground with his soldiers talking about something as trivial as fly fishing. These men are experiencing the threat that they could potentially be losing their lives tomorrow. And General Eisenhower is wanting to calm their nerves. And this was not an isolated incident. It's recorded that General Eisenhower did this often, where he's there with his troops and he's just being a human. It's not a general and it's not a soldier in this moment. It's a human who loves, a man who loves fly fishing, talking to other men that enjoy fly fishing. And he's taking them back. He's slowing down that amygdala, that stress, that fight or flight response. And he's taking them back home and he's giving them some source of comfort and something to take their minds off of the crisis in this moment. And he's just drawing them into a really shared and beautiful moment of humanity and community. And then we're going to end with this before we get into your questions and answers, a quote from Brene Brown. Vulnerability is not weakness, and the uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure we face every day are not optional. Our only choice is a question of engagement. Our willingness to own and engage with our vulnerability determines the depth of our courage and the clarity of our purpose. As a leader, I know in this time of crisis, you feel the weight of the world on your shoulders. You have so many responsibilities, so many stresses and burdens and tensions, things that I couldn't even understand with your family, with your own anxieties, your own wrestling, and then with your leadership responsibilities at work. And I hope that we can take some of that off of you and say that as a leader, the only thing that you need to do is to be human, to show up, to be there for your team, to trust the preparation that you've put in to decide who you want to be, to lead with vision, and then step into community. So we're going to transition. I'm going to bring Jeremiah back up at this time. And Jeremiah, did we get any questions in the chat box? I'd love to have some time to be able to answer those.
Yeah, and I would encourage everybody, so many times, as great as a training can be, a lot of times the best learning happens and is maximized with the question and answer session. So I hope you have some questions. Please engage on this. There's our poll. Is everybody seeing that right there? We'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, Suzette actually from the Oklahoma City Chamber posed a great question, Wes, a few slides back. He asked, what happens when your team doesn't understand why you can't share certain info?
Yeah, that's really tough and something that we see incredibly often. And I'll bring Jeremiah in to answer this as well, because I know he's been in that situation. And Jeremiah and I share a close friendship, but then at the same time, he's also my leader. And so it is interesting sometimes when you have to step into boss mode and you're not able to share everything. But I think just communicating that, so being really clear with your team of guys, I would love to share with you why these decisions are being made. But my responsibility as a leader, first and foremost, is to be loyal to the organization. And if I were to share this information with you, I would not be doing my job as a leader. I would not be loyal to the organization. I would not be loyal to those above me. And I would love to tell you everything that I can. And I think clearly communicating that from the beginning. So a lot of the tension in those situations comes from the followers feeling like the leader's just holding out on me. They're just not telling me stuff because they don't think I'm important enough to know this stuff. And so just really clearly communicating that. I would love to be able to share with you everything, and I can't. I'm going to share everything that I can. My commitment to you is to be honest and transparent to the extent that it's beneficial to the team and beneficial to the organization. But as a leader, there are just certain things that I can't share. Jeremiah, what would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Wes, I think you nailed that right there. Just going back to the commitment of my commitment as a leader is to the organization first and foremost, because without the organization, I can't be loyal to my employees. We can't benefit employees if there's a weakness with the organization. So first and foremost, commitment to the organization. And I think if you hammer that over and over and let them know that is your commitment, and then to them, hopefully that will communicate where you stand with that. So Suzette, I hope that answered your question. We've got some more questions coming in just a little bit of time, so we're going to run through these. There's a really good one on here I want to make sure we get to as well. Thank you all for these. Let me see here, make sure I don't skip over one. All right, so Peter Evans asked here, any advice on leading up? As an executive director of an organization, any tips on how to lead your board through the time of crisis? That's a good one.
That is good. That's good. And that can be really tough leading up, but it absolutely can happen. So leadership is influence, and influence does not obey the rules of hierarchy. And so I think for yourself, or one way that I like to approach that is just for my own integrity, is being really clear and communicating. This is where my heart is. This is the type of leader that I want to be. And I want to work for an organization and have the opportunity to be able to be the type of leader that I want to be and have integrity with myself. So I'm not experiencing dissonance of having to act in a role or be a type of leader that I don't want to be, and the internal tension that creates. And you have to be careful with that conversation. Obviously, you don't want to lose your job, and you don't want your board or your leadership to say, well, then you're not the right leader for this. But I think subtly and just clearly communicating, this is who I want to be. This is the type of leader that I want. This is the type of organization I want to work at. This is who I see us becoming. That can be really beneficial. And then the second thing is, and this is true of any relationship, is put their needs ahead of your own. So ask them, what can I do for you? How can I support you? Where are you feeling the tension? Where are you experiencing maybe some exhaustion or chaos or confusion? How can I serve you in that? What can I take off of your plate? So I try to do that with Jeremiah. And then also, truthfully, and Nathan, who's our CEO and president, who's 2 levels above me, I'll text Nathan occasionally and just say, hey, thinking about you. And my genuine heart and desire in that is just to be the type of person that supports and loves everyone around me, regardless of job title. And so I think taking that mindset can be helpful. Jeremiah, what do you think? Do you have any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I've got one quick one. Again, coming back to the identity of always coming back to the organizational mission, vision, values of pushing the board in that direction. During times of crisis, a lot of people, I think, want to run down rabbit trails, new ideas, get creative. Now is the time to really shrink some of that, have high control on that, really lean on that foundation of your mission, vision, values. If you don't have that, this might be a great time to dive into that and start thinking about how you might create that. Again, come back to identity, communicate that up, and keep doing that. So we have another question that's actually really insightful. It is anonymous, so I won't give the name away, but it is from a Texas friend here. How can you show up for people when you are still, how can you show up for people when they are still working in person as essential work needs to be done on site, but you yourself are self-quarantining? That's a tough situation. What do you think, Wes?
That is a really tough situation. I think first, I sympathize with you on that. That's not an easy thing. I know as a leader, your heart is to be with your people. And so there's a couple components to that. I think one, trusting that you've done the things in the past to earn the trust and earn the respect of your team, and know that they know that you would be there if you could be there and if it was safe to be there. And then the second thing is continue to check on them in different ways. So sending texts, sending emails, calling them. If you have their home address, or you can write them handwritten notes. I think handwritten notes at all times is a really impactful way to lead, but especially in times of crisis. I think just that's the biggest deal, would just be trusting that your team knows your heart and knows that you want to be there for them, but you're not able to be. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to add, Jeremiah?
No, that's great. So if we think of anything else, we will get in contact with you and share some of that insight as well. I'm sure Nathan is on here too, and he's probably got some insights that he'll follow up afterwards with us that we might be able to pass along. There are a couple more questions that I don't know if we're going to get to. I want to honor everybody as we wrap up our time here. Make sure we do get that gift to you in the crisis model that we've created for you. So just so you know, the poll results, I think Wes, can everybody see these?
They should be able to see them. Yep.
All right. Looks like exercising, just like, JFK in the swimming pool was 30%. It looks like our winner there. That's good. So
playing with your kids or playing games or with your kids are outside a second. So that's really cool. And then cooking and eating. That's a big one.
Yeah, I think I've put on weight here. So
I wasn't going to say anything.
We have a few free resources for you all. please feel free to utilize these, share these with you, yourself, your team, your friends, whoever you think might be benefit from these. This crisis management model, do you want to speak to this real quickly? We've got 3 minutes, Wes.
Yeah, I'd love to. So here's the last slide. So there again is our contact information. We would love to hear from you. Genuinely, our whole purpose in doing this today is to serve you, and we hope that you feel served. And if there's anything else we can do to help you, to take some of the pressure off of you as a leader and be a support for you, that's why we exist. It's literally why Strata exists in times of crisis and not in times of crisis. So we do have a bonus gift for you, and you're only seeing the front page right here on the right-hand part of the slide, but it's a 2-sheet deal. It just gives a model for leading through crisis and making critical thinking and decision-making. And a lot of this is based on a psychologist named Carl Weick, his research back in the late 80s and early 90s on this idea of sense-making. And you'll see on the backside of this bonus gift that we're going to send you with this model for decision making, you'll see an explanation of each step along the way. So you'll be able to read more about that. But if you have questions about the model, please feel free to reach out to me. The idea is that there's a stimulus, and anytime that you receive a crisis, there's a stimulus which gets filtered through your beliefs, assumptions, and values. You have your automatic reaction, which is largely emotional. Step 4, then you act. And this is the part that people get hung up on. They want to know everything before they act. But what science and what psychology has shown us is that action produces clarity. A lot of times clarity can't be gained before action. So that can be scary, because what if I make the wrong decision? And I would say you're probably a lot of times are going to make the wrong decision, or if not the wrong decision, the right decision that needs a few tweaks. And so having grace for yourself there, and then going through a sense-making process, analyzing and analyzing and evaluating that situation. And then step 7 is really the crucial one. So as a leader, you need to go back through the cycle, continue going through the cycle until you make the right decision, challenging your beliefs, assumptions, and values, and then adjusting accordingly. And what you'll see is immature leaders often skip the challenge step, and they'll just bounce back and forth between analysis and evaluation and sense-making. So analysis and evaluation reveals I made the wrong decision, but my pride dictates that I have to go back to step 5 and justify why that was the right decision, instead of having the courage to be honest with myself, challenge my beliefs, assumptions, and values, and then go back and act or react or adjust accordingly. So all of that is explained in that 1-sheeter. We're going to send that directly to the email that you provided when you signed up for this webinar. If you don't receive that from us for any reason in a couple of days, send us an email. We'll be happy to send that. That's a free resource. So print it, post it, share it with your friends, do whatever you would like to do with it. And we're just so grateful for this time that we had with you today. Thank you all for hopping on. Like I said, we're here for you. Here's our contact information. And again, if you hear anything today, hear that you're doing a good job, you're leading through crisis to the best of your ability, have grace for yourself. We want to validate you as a leader. The fact that you showed up to this webinar today means that you're doing the best that you can. You're seeking out resources, you're seeking out help. And so the fact that you registered and tuned in today, I want that just to be an encouragement to you in and of itself, because leaders that aren't trying to be the best that they can be, they wouldn't do something like that. So thank you all very much. Jeremiah, any parting thoughts?
Yeah, we'll be redoing this webinar next week. There was about, I don't know, 65 people on a waiting list. So we said, hey, let's do this again. So please feel free to share the link. I've shared that in the chat box. In 2 weeks, Dr. Nathan Miller is going to be sharing a free webinar as well. It's going to be strategic planning in uncertain times. So I think it's going to be really beneficial for everybody. We're here for you all. Like Wes said, as a leader, you're prepared. You have vision and you have community. So lean into the community, use the community. We're here for you. Let us know if you need to chat. Our contact information's on here. So hopefully you all will join us again. Have a great day and keep speaking hope.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.